8 months pregnant and alone in a city that once tried to swallow her whole, Amani Brooks believed she had finally escaped. She had signed the papers, packed her life into 2 suitcases, and walked away from the most dangerous man in Seoul without looking back. What she never told him, what she swore she would carry to her grave, was the daughter growing inside her. His daughter. But fate doesn't negotiate with desperate women, and today, in the polished waiting room of a Gangnam clinic, Kang Ji-hoon just walked through the door, and he is already looking straight at her. If this story already has your heart pounding, stay until the very end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. The appointment was supposed to take 40 minutes. Imani had timed it carefully, the way she timed everything now. Factoring in the elevator wait, the check-in delay, the inevitable stretch of sitting in a chair that was too low for a woman 8 months gone, her lower back screaming at her the entire time. She had chosen this clinic in Gangnam because it was expensive enough to demand discretion and far enough from Itaewon that she wouldn't run into anyone who recognized her face from the life she used to live. She had been careful. She had been so careful for so long that careful had stopped feeling like a strategy and started feeling like a second skin. She was standing at the reception desk, sliding her insurance card across the marble counter, when the front doors opened behind her. She didn't turn around. She had no reason to turn around. The receptionist was already reaching for her card, already smiling with the rehearsed warmth of someone paid to project calm, and Amani was focused on the single task directly in front of her. But then the air in the room changed. That was the only way she could ever describe it afterward. The air changed, the way it changes before a storm rolls in off the Han River. That particular drop in pressure that makes the skin on your arms tighten before you consciously understand why. She turned around. Kang Ji-hoon stood inside the entrance, flanked by 2 men in dark suits whose stillness was itself a kind of violence. He was dressed simply. Charcoal trousers, a white shirt with the collar open, no tie. But Ji-hoon had never needed armor to look like a man who controlled rooms. He controlled them by existing inside them. He was 41 years old, and every year of what he had done and ordered, done and survived, had settled into the planes of his face in ways that made him look less like a person and more like something that had been carved. His eyes swept the lobby with the automatic efficiency of a man who assessed exits and threats before he assessed anything else. And then those eyes landed on her, and they stopped. The receptionist said something. Amani didn't hear it. Ji-hoon's gaze moved from her face to her stomach and stayed there. The silence between them lasted perhaps 3 seconds. It felt considerably longer. "Mrs. Brooks," the receptionist's voice came from very far away. "Your card?" Imani turned back to the desk and took her card with a hand that was steadier than she had any right to expect. She signed the intake form. She printed her name in the box at the bottom. She did all of these things while every nerve in her body was screaming at her to move, to find a door, to get out of this building and into a cab and across the river before he crossed the lobby and reached her. But she was 8 months pregnant and wearing flats, and there was nowhere to go. And some part of her, the part she had never quite managed to silence, no matter how many months she put between herself and him, had always known this moment was coming. She felt him before she heard him. The warmth of him, the specific gravity that had always made the space around him feel smaller. Then his voice, low and even, directly behind her left shoulder. "Imani." She closed her eyes for exactly 1 breath. Then she turned. Up close, he looked the same and entirely different. The same face she had memorized and then spent 6 months trying to forget. But there were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there before. And his jaw was set in a way she recognized. That particular tension he carried when he was controlling something powerful and close to the surface. "Ji-hoon." Her voice came out flat. Good. Flat was good. His eyes moved to her stomach again. She watched him process the math in real time. The rounding, the drop, the unmistakable weight of a pregnancy in its final stretch. And she watched his expression do something she had never seen it do in 3 years of marriage. It cracked, just for a moment, just at the edges, before the control came back down like a shutter. "How far?" he said. Not a question. A demand with the verb stripped out. "That's not your concern." "How far?" 8 months. She said it because lying would only delay the inevitable, and she was too tired for delays. 8 months, Ji-hoon. I have a prenatal appointment in 10 minutes, and I'd like to get to it. She tried to step around him. His arm didn't move to block her. He wasn't a man who grabbed. But his presence alone was enough to stop her, because stepping around Kang Ji-hoon required that you be willing to pretend he wasn't there, and she had never been able to manage that. 8 months, he repeated very quietly. Don't do the arithmetic out loud. It's beneath you. The muscle in his jaw tightened. You were pregnant when you left. I was 6 weeks along when I left, and I didn't know it yet, and it wouldn't have changed anything if I had. The lie came out smoother than she expected. She had rehearsed it, in the dark of her apartment on the nights when sleep wouldn't come, rehearsed it against the possibility of exactly this conversation. But rehearsed lies and deployed lies were different animals, and she felt the difference now in the way her pulse jumped. Ji-hoon looked at her for a long moment. His 2 men had positioned themselves near the entrance with the casual precision of people who were never truly casual. The receptionist had found somewhere urgent to be. The lobby had quietly emptied of everyone except the 3 of them, and the particular species of tension that Kang Ji-hoon generated wherever he went. Is it mine? He said. The question landed like something thrown. Amani held his gaze and said nothing, and in that nothing he found his answer because he had always been able to read her silences better than most people could read full sentences. His hand moved. She should have stepped back. Instead, she stood completely still while he placed his palm against the swell of her stomach, and in the exact moment his hand made contact, his daughter kicked. Hard, deliberate, unmistakable. A small foot driving outward as if the child inside her had been waiting for precisely this. Ji-hoon went very still. Imani watched something move through his face that she had no name for. He was not a man who wept. She had never seen him weep, not at his father's funeral, not in the aftermath of the worst night of their marriage, not once in the years she had known him. But she watched his eyes change now, watched something ancient and unguarded surface briefly before he locked it away. And she understood that she was looking at a man who had just felt his child move for the first time, and that nothing about the next several hours was going to go the way she had planned. Imani. His voice was different now. The command had gone out of it. Something rawer had taken its place. Tell me her name. She hadn't told him it was a girl. The word her landed in her chest like a splinter. I haven't chosen one yet, she said. The second lie. She had chosen a name 6 weeks ago at 2 a.m. with her hand on her stomach and tears. She refused to acknowledge running down her temples into her hair. Ji-hoon removed his hand slowly. He straightened. When the control came back, it came back complete. But she had seen behind it now, and they both knew it. Your appointment is in 8 minutes, he said. I'll wait. You'll leave. I'll wait, Amani. She stared at him. He stared back, and there was nothing uncertain in his expression. No negotiation, no concession. Just the same immovable bedrock certainty that had drawn her to him and suffocated her in equal measure for the entirety of their marriage. She thought about calling his bluff. She thought about walking to the elevator and pressing the button and going to her appointment as if this encounter had not happened. She thought about a lot of things in the space of about 4 seconds. Then she turned and walked to the elevator because her back was killing her and she needed to sit down, and she was not going to have this argument standing up in a clinic lobby at 32 weeks pregnant. He was still there when she came back down 40 minutes later. He was seated in one of the reception chairs with his long legs extended and his phone in his hand, and he looked so exactly like a man who had no intention of going anywhere that something in her chest tightened against her will. His 2 men were still near the entrance. Nobody in the lobby was looking at them, which meant everybody in the lobby had been told not to. Ji-hoon stood when he saw her. He crossed to her with the economy of movement that was entirely characteristic of him. No wasted motion, no performative gesture. And he said, I have a car outside. I have a cab app on my phone. Imani. He said her name the way he always had, like it was the last word of an argument he expected to win. Come with me. She looked at him. She looked at the door. She thought about the apartment she was going home to, the quiet, the careful life she had built, the nights she spent talking to her unborn daughter about cities and languages and all the ordinary beautiful things she intended for their future, none of which included this man and the specific gravity of his world. For what? She said. What exactly are you proposing here? I'm proposing that you come with me somewhere private so that we can talk. That's all. That's never all with you. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. No, he agreed, but it's where we start. She wanted to say no. Every rational piece of her wanted to say no, but she was 8 months pregnant in the lobby of a Gangnam clinic, and Ji-hoon was looking at her with that expression she had never successfully defended against. Not commanding, not cold, but something stripped of pretense, something that looked, against all probability, like a man who was quietly undone. 1 hour, she said. We talk for 1 hour, and then I go home. All right. She didn't believe him. She got in the car anyway. The penthouse was on the 43rd floor of a residential tower 12 blocks north, with floor-to-ceiling windows facing the Han River, and a silence so complete it felt pressurized. She had never been to this apartment. The one they had shared during the marriage was in Yongsan, large and beautiful, and full of the particular tension of two people trying to occupy the same space, while one of them ran an empire the other refused to look directly at. This apartment was different, quieter. The furniture was dark and spare, and through the hallway she could see 3 doors, all closed. Ji-hoon poured water. He did not pour anything stronger, which surprised her. She sat on the couch, and he sat in the chair across from her, and for a moment neither of them said anything. Outside, the Han moved gray and heavy under the late afternoon sky. "How long did you know?" he said finally. "I told you. I didn't know when I—" Imani. Not aggressive, just exact. "How long did you know?" She looked at her hands. 2 weeks after I left. I took a test in a pharmacy bathroom in Mapo. The silence that followed this had its own particular weight, and you decided not to tell me. I decided that telling you would undo everything. She kept her voice level. I spent 3 years watching you carry the weight of what you do. I watched it change you. I watched what it did to the people around you. And I decided that our daughter was not going to be born into that. So you were going to raise her alone. Yes. In Seoul. I was going to leave Seoul. I was going to go back to the States and start over. She looked up at him. That was the plan. When? After she's born. When it was safe to fly. Ji-hoon set his glass down. He was quiet for a moment, and in that quiet she could see him working through something, measuring words the way he measured everything. Against utility, against consequence. "Show me something," he said, and stood. She didn't move. "Show you what?" He walked down the hallway and opened the second door and stood back. Imani rose slowly, one hand pressed to the small of her back, and walked to the doorway. She stopped. The room beyond was a nursery, fully furnished, fully prepared, a crib in white and warm wood, a changing station against the far wall, a glider in the corner with a small knitted blanket folded over its arm. The walls were painted a soft sage green. There was a mobile hung above the crib, small animals in muted colors turning slowly in the current from the heating vent. On the shelf above the changing station, a row of parenting books stood in a careful line, their spines unmarked. She stood in the doorway and could not speak. "I've had a neonatologist on retainer since February," Ji-hoon said from behind her. His voice was entirely flat. "A pediatric cardiologist as well. There's a medical team on call 24 hours that can be here in 11 minutes. I updated the specifications on the crib in March when the safety recall came out on the original model." A beat. "I have been doing this for 8 months, Imani. Alone. Without being asked." She turned to look at him. "How did you know it was a girl?" "I didn't." A pause, so brief she almost missed it. "I hoped." She pressed her hand against her mouth. She was not going to cry. She had made a decision about crying in front of him, and she was not going to revise it now. "You've been watching me," she said. Her voice came out rougher than she intended. "Yes. This whole time. Yes." "Ji-hoon, there was an attempt on a family associate in Itaewon in November," he said. Quiet, precise. "You were 2 blocks away. I had a team reposition in 4 minutes. You never knew." He let that settle. "In January, the man in the apartment below yours was identified by my network as a low-level operative with connections to the CO family. He was relocated within 48 hours. You never knew that either." His eyes held hers. "I have been watching over you because the world I move in does not stop caring about the people connected to me simply because they've signed divorce papers. Distance was never protection, Imani. It was the illusion of protection." She thought about the last 6 months. The feeling she'd occasionally had, late at night, that something was not quite ordinary about the quiet outside her window. The cab driver in February who had seemed to know her route before she named it. The way certain spaces around her always seemed to clear at odd moments. She had told herself she was paranoid. She had told herself it was the pregnancy hormones and the isolation and the particular anxiety of building a life alone in a city that didn't owe her anything. "You had people on me," she said. "I had people keeping you alive," he said, without apology. "That is not the same thing, and you know it." She looked away from him, through the nursery doorway, at the crib he had chosen and the books he had read, and the mobile turning slowly above the place where his daughter was meant to sleep. She thought about leaving him. She thought about the specific day she had decided to leave, the argument that had finally broken her, the things said that couldn't be unsaid, the moment she understood that loving someone was not the same as being able to survive the life they lived. She had been right about all of it. She had been right, and she had still been wrong, because the calculation she had made had not accounted for the fact that Ji-hoon would never actually let her go. "The network found something," he said from behind her. The tone had changed, flatter, stripped of everything except operational precision. "We started finding it 2 weeks ago. I was going to tell you, I didn't know how." She turned. "Tell me what?" His expression was the one she remembered from the worst moments of their marriage. Not cold, but contained. The face of a man loading a weapon he hoped he wouldn't need. "Someone has been watching you, Imani." "Not my people. Someone else." Professional surveillance, multiple operatives running for at least 4 months. His jaw tightened. "They have photos of your clinic visits. They have a copy of your ultrasound from March. Someone with access to medical records and the resources to run a long-term operation has been building a file on you and our daughter, and I don't yet know why, but I intend to find out. Before tonight." The room was very quiet. Imani felt the cold move through her before the fear had time to organize itself into coherent thought. A deep, animal cold, the kind that starts in the stomach and spreads outward. Her hand moved without thinking to the curve of her belly. "Who?" she said. "I don't know yet." He looked at her, and his eyes were steady, and she understood in that moment that Kang Ji-hoon was the most frightening man she had ever known, and also the only thing standing between her unborn daughter and whatever was building in the dark outside the radius of his protection. "But whoever it is," he said, "they just made the worst decision of their lives." The city outside the window had gone dark by the time Ji-hoon's security chief arrived. His name was Park Sung-jin, and he was the kind of man who entered rooms the way water entered cracks, quietly, completely, and with the specific intention of finding every weak point. He was 53 years old, built like someone who had stopped caring about appearances 30 years ago and never looked back. And he had served Kang Ji-hoon for 19 years with a loyalty so total it had cost him 2 marriages and a relationship with a son he no longer spoke to. He set a tablet on the dining table without preamble and pulled up a grid of photographs. Imani was still on the couch. She had not agreed to stay. She had also not left, which amounted to the same thing. And Ji-hoon had not pressed her on it because pressing Imani Brooks on anything was the fastest way to guarantee the opposite outcome. He had learned that in the first year of their marriage, and he had apparently not learned it well enough, given how the marriage had ended. Sung-jin spread his hands across the screen. 41 photographs recovered from a storage account linked to a shell company registered in Macau. The oldest is dated 4 months ago. This one. He tapped an image and expanded it. It was Imani, standing outside a pharmacy in Mapo-gu, a paper bag in her hand, her coat pulled tight against a February wind. The angle was from across the street and slightly elevated. A vehicle, Imani realized, or a window on the second floor of the building opposite. She stared at the photograph. She remembered that day. She had gone in for prenatal vitamins and come out with a box of crackers because the nausea had been bad that week, and the smell of the apartment kitchen made it worse. She remembered standing exactly where the photograph showed her standing, waiting for a gap in the pedestrian traffic, thinking about nothing except getting home and lying on her left side. "There are 17 photographs taken at or near your residential building," Sung-jin said, without looking at her. He spoke to the table, to the information, with the affect of a man for whom emotion was an inefficiency. 11 at various medical facilities, 6 at the supermarket on Mapo Daero, 4 at the park near the Han River overpass where you walk on Sunday mornings. Imani's stomach contracted. She pressed her hand against it on instinct. They know the Sunday walk, she said. They know the Sunday walk, the Wednesday clinic, the Friday pharmacy rotation. They know you prefer the self-checkout at the supermarket and that you take the stairs instead of the elevator when your back isn't bothering you. Sung Jin looked up. His expression was not unkind exactly, but it was the expression of a man delivering a weather report. You have been under comprehensive surveillance, Mrs. Brooks. This is not casual monitoring. This is a professional operation with significant resources behind it. Imani looked at Ji-hoon. He was standing at the window with his back to the room, which was something he did when he was managing something he didn't want visible on his face. Ji-hoon, he turned. Who did this? She said. We're still... Don't tell me you're working on it. Tell me what you know right now, in this room, tonight. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he pulled out the chair across from Sung Jin and sat down, and she understood that she was about to be brought inside the edge of his world in a way she had spent 3 years resisting, and that she no longer had the standing to refuse it. The shell company in Macau is a dead end. It was dissolved 8 days ago, which means whoever set this up anticipated discovery eventually and built an exit into the architecture. But the photographs were taken on 3 types of camera equipment. 2 of them are consistent with what independent contractors use. Freelance surveillance work, nothing traceable. The third is a specific model issued by a private security firm based in Chicago. Ji-hoon folded his hands on the table. That firm does not work for Korean clients. Their client base is North American, specifically corporate litigation and high net worth domestic disputes. The last 2 words landed with a particular weight. Domestic disputes. Imani heard it. She felt the shape of it before the specific name arrived. Darius, she said. Neither man confirmed it. Neither man denied it. Sung Jin looked at the table. Ji-hoon looked at her with that particular stillness that was its own kind of answer. You think Darius hired someone to surveil me? She said it flat, without inflection, testing the sentence against reality. I think it's consistent with the evidence we have at this stage, Ji-hoon said carefully. I am not prepared to name him as the principal until we have confirmation. But it's what you think. A pause. Yes. Imani leaned back against the couch cushions and pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes and breathed through it. Darius Bennett. She had been married to him for 2 years before Ji-hoon, had divorced him 3 years before that marriage, had spent the better part of a decade building enough distance between herself and that chapter of her life that it had started to feel like it had happened to someone else. Darius was not a criminal. He was not dangerous in any obvious physical sense. He was a corporate attorney in Chicago with tailored suits and a gift for making cruelty sound reasonable. And she had left him because living with him had felt like being slowly erased. She had not told Ji-hoon the full history. She had told him enough. That there was a previous marriage, that it had ended badly, that she did not want to discuss it. Ji-hoon had accepted this with the restraint he showed in the first year of their marriage, before the weight of his empire had started pressing into every corner of their life together. Why? She said from behind her hands. We believe he may have calculated a possible paternity claim, Sung Jin said, with the same weatherman flatness. If he had any contact with you in the period that... No. She dropped her hands. No, that's not possible. Darius and I... The timeline doesn't support it. It's not his child. I know that, Ji-hoon said. His voice had dropped to something quieter, something that was not quite gentle but was as close as he got. But he may not know that. And if someone told him otherwise, or if he calculated the dates and arrived at a different conclusion, then he hired investigators to surveil me for 4 months and copy my medical records and photograph me outside pharmacies. She heard her own voice go thin and sharp. And he's building what exactly? A custody case? For a child that isn't his? Potentially. Ji-hoon's jaw tightened. Or leverage. Darius Bennett is a litigator, Imani. He doesn't need to win a custody case. He needs to file one. He needs to create a legal dispute complicated enough that it draws scrutiny. Toward you, toward the pregnancy, and by extension toward me. The room was quiet. Outside the windows, Seoul burned gold and white against the dark. Imani understood. She understood it fully, in the specific way that comes not from reasoning, but from knowing a person well enough to recognize the shape of their malice at a distance. Darius would not have done this out of love or genuine belief. Darius would have done it because she had left him, and then she had gone to Korea and married someone powerful, and that sequence of events would have settled in him like a splinter for years, small, invisible, and working steadily toward infection. "He wants to hurt me," she said. "He wants leverage," Ji-hoon said, "over you, and through you, over me. And the fact that he's chosen this method, this particular pressure point—" He stopped. When he continued, his voice was entirely controlled, and the control itself was the most frightening thing in the room. "It tells me he's been patient. This wasn't an impulsive decision. He's been planning this for some time." Sung-jin cleared his throat. "There's something else." Amani looked at him. He pulled up a second document on the tablet. "The leaked medical records include your ultrasound from March, specifically the dating scan, the one that establishes gestational age. A copy of that scan was sent 3 weeks ago to an attorney in Chicago who specializes in international family law." He set the tablet down. "The filing hasn't been made yet, but the preparation is complete." The silence that followed was the kind that has physical mass. Ji-hoon stood. He walked back to the window. He stood with his hands in his pockets and his shoulders set, and Amani could read the tension in his back the way she had learned to read the weather. The particular set that meant he was deciding something irrevocable, running the calculus of consequence with the cold precision that had built his empire and destroyed their marriage. "I'm going to handle this," he said. "How?" He didn't answer immediately. She had learned in 3 years to be afraid of the pauses. "Ji-hoon." She pulled herself upright, one hand on the armrest, the momentum of 8 months of pregnancy making every movement a negotiation. "Look at me." He turned. "Tell me what handle this means, specifically." "It means I'm going to make sure Darius Bennett is never in a position to file anything, threaten anything, or approach you or our daughter in any capacity for the rest of his life." "Are you telling me you're going to hurt him?" "I'm telling you I'm going to remove the problem." "That's not an answer." His eyes held hers. "I'm not going to hurt him, Imani. It's not what this is. I'm going to dismantle his ability to threaten this family through means that will not require me to explain myself to a prosecutor." A beat. "You have my word. She had argued with his word before. She had thrown his word back at him on the worst night of their marriage, cataloged the specific instances in which his word had been a construction rather than a commitment. She had been right to do it. She was not sure she was in a position to do it now, standing in his penthouse at 32 weeks pregnant with a professional surveillance operation running outside her apartment building. "Your word," she said. "Yes." She looked at him for a long moment. He held the look without flinching, without performing steadiness. He simply was steady, in the maddening, unshakable way that had always made her feel, by turns, safe and suffocated. "I want to know everything," she said finally. "Everything you find. You don't get to protect me from information anymore." That was always the wrong call. Something shifted in his expression. "Agreed. And I'm not staying here, Ji-hoon. I'm going back to my apartment." The shift reversed. It's not a negotiation. "I'm going back to my apartment tonight. You can have your people outside the building, inside the lobby, on the roof if you want, but I go home. The operation targeting you is still active. Until we've identified every operative and shut down the network, you are not safe in that apartment. You know this. I also know that if I stay in this penthouse under your protection, I have already made a decision that I haven't finished making yet." She held his gaze. "Give me tonight. Let me think." He didn't like it. She could see him not liking it, could see the impulse to override her moving across his face before the restraint caught it and pulled it back. "Double detail on your building," he said finally. "Sung-jin's team, and a direct line to me." "Fine. And if anything, Imani, feels wrong, you call. Not your cab app. Me." "Fine." Sung-jin was already moving, already speaking quietly into his earpiece, already reconstructing the operational perimeter around a woman who had just told his employer no and had the extraordinary distinction of being allowed to do so. The car took her back across the river in the dark. She sat in the back seat with her hand on her stomach and her forehead against the cool glass and watched the city slide past. The Han was invisible below them, black and wide and moving. The driver said nothing. She was grateful. In the apartment, she ran a bath she didn't end up taking, standing at the sink instead with cold water running over her wrists while she stared at herself in the mirror. Her face looked back at her, tired, complicated, older than she expected. She had a memory, sudden and sharp, of standing in a different bathroom in a different city telling herself she was making the right choice by leaving. She had been so certain. The certainty had been the only clean thing she owned in those first months. She dried her hands and walked to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed and talked to her daughter for a while, the way she did most nights, quietly, in the dark, explaining the world to someone who couldn't hear her yet and who she was already, catastrophically, in love with. She told her daughter about the nursery, the sage green walls, the mobile with the small animals, the parenting books with the unmarked spines, which meant he had read them and not needed to mark them, or had read them so many times that the marking had become unnecessary. She told her daughter that her father was the most infuriating man in Seoul, and possibly on the Asian continent, and that she wasn't yet sure what she was going to do about that. She fell asleep with her hand on her stomach and did not dream. At 3:47 in the morning, her phone rang. She was awake before the second ring, the way she had learned to be during the pregnancy, her body's new relationship with deep sleep being a kind of dark comedy in its own right. She grabbed the phone off the nightstand. Ji-hoon, she answered. There's a car outside your building that wasn't there 2 hours ago. His voice was even, not alarmed, but awake, which meant he had not slept. Black sedan, Mapo plates, no commercial registration. It's parked on the service road where my people can't get a clean visual on the occupants without moving to a position that might spook them. She sat up. What do you want me to do? Nothing. Stay where you are. I need you to stay in the bedroom away from the windows. A pause. Are the locks set? Ji-hoon, I'm 32 weeks pregnant, not 11. Yes, the locks are set. Are you frightened? The question surprised her. He didn't usually ask. He usually assessed and acted and told her the assessment and the action after the fact as a courtesy. The question itself was a kind of fracture, small and revealing. Yes, she said, because the apartment was dark and it was 3:47 in the morning and someone had been photographing her at the park on Sunday mornings, and she was alone. I'm coming, he said. You don't need to. I'm coming, Imani. He ended the call. She sat in the dark bedroom with the phone in her hand and listened to the sound of her own breathing and the city outside and the particular silence of an apartment where someone might or might not be deciding whether to come through the door. She was not, she realized, going to tell him not to come. She was not going to argue about this one. She was sitting in the dark, talking herself out of fear, while a car with no registered plates sat on the service road below her window, and there was a man with 19 years of operational experience and the full machinery of Seoul's most powerful crime organization who had just told her he was on his way, and she was 32 weeks pregnant and alone, and she was going to let him come. The car outside did not move in the 11 minutes it took Ji-hoon to arrive. Sung-jin's team held position. No one approached the building. It was possible the sedan was nothing, a driver sleeping off a late shift, a surveillance op that had already shut down, a coincidence that the night had dressed up to look like a threat. But when Ji-hoon came through her apartment door at 4 in the morning and she saw the look on his face, she understood that he did not believe it was nothing, and that the shape of what was building around them was larger and more deliberate than even the photographs and the leaked records had suggested. He sat down on the couch without being invited and pulled out his phone and began making calls in quiet Korean, the specific shorthand of a man running an operation in real time. And Imani sat across from him and listened to the edges of it. Names she didn't recognize, locations, something about the Macau company that made his jaw set, and watched the man who had signed her divorce papers 8 months ago work with the terrifying competence of someone who had built his life around never being caught unprepared. At 5 in the morning, Sung-jin sent a photograph. Ji-hoon looked at it for a long time. Then he looked up at her, and his expression was the one she had never been able to read. The one that came just before the information she didn't want. The driver of the sedan, he said. One of my contacts has an ID. He paused. He's a private investigator out of Chicago, licensed in Illinois. He's made 2 trips to Seoul in the past 6 weeks. Imani felt the cold again. The stomach first cold. Is he one of Darius's people? Ji-hoon set the phone face down on the table. He's on Darius's payroll. Yes. She looked at her hands. She looked at the city outside, beginning to go gray with the approach of dawn. She thought about Darius in Chicago, in his tailored suit, in the offices of an international family law attorney, building a case around an ultrasound he had obtained illegally for a child that was not his. And she felt something move through her that was not quite rage and not quite grief, but occupied the territory where those two things met. "He's not going to stop," she said. "No." Jihoon's voice was very quiet. "He's not. And staying in this apartment isn't—" "No," he said again. "It isn't." She was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, the first thin light was cutting the horizon. Down on the service road, the sedan was gone. Moved sometime in the last hour, its occupant presumably satisfied with whatever observation he had made or spooked by the additional detail Sung-jin had repositioned in the dark. She pressed her hand flat against her daughter. Her daughter pushed back, the small, insistent pressure that had become the most reliable thing in her life. She looked at Ji-hoon. He was watching her with the specific attention he reserved for situations he understood to be decisive. Not pressing, not performing patience, but fully present in the way that powerful men so rarely manage to be. "If I come back," she said, "if I move in here, that is not me agreeing to everything. That is not me deciding that the last 8 months didn't happen or that the reasons I left weren't real. I know. It is me making a decision about my daughter's safety. That's the only thing it is right now. I know, Imani. And you don't get to use it as leverage. You don't get to treat it as something I owe you. I won't." She looked at him. The morning light was coming up behind him, and he looked tired and awake, and like a man who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time and had not yet decided whether to put it down. "There's a private investigator out there with photographs of me at the Sunday park," she said, "and a copy of my ultrasound, and an attorney in Chicago waiting for a filing that could drag my daughter into a legal dispute before she's even born." "Yes, and you can stop all of that." "Yes." "Then stop it," she said. The words came out flat and certain and without apology. "Stop it, Ji-hoon, and then we're going to have the conversation we should have had 8 months ago, the one we've both been avoiding, and we're going to have it completely honestly for the first time in the history of this relationship. Because I am not raising our daughter in a house built on half-truths, and I am not rebuilding anything with you unless the foundation is real." She did not finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Ji-hoon had heard the part that mattered, and the part that mattered was that she was still in the room, still looking at him, still present in the particular way that Imani Brooks was present when she had made a decision and was standing behind it with the full weight of who she was. He nodded once. Outside, Seoul was turning gray and then gold, the river catching the first light the way it always did, indifferently, beautifully, without caring what had been decided in the rooms overlooking it. She moved into the penthouse that afternoon. She brought 2 bags and her prenatal vitamins and the small framed photograph she kept on the nightstand at the apartment. A picture taken in Jeju 3 years ago, before everything, when they were still new enough to each other that joy hadn't yet learned to be complicated. She set it face down in the bag and did not look at it again, but she brought it, which was its own kind of statement. Ji-hoon said nothing about the photograph. He was already working by the time she arrived. Calls, meetings conducted in the living room with men whose names she wasn't given, documents moving across the dining table in controlled sequences that reminded her, as it always had, of watching someone run a small government. Sung-jin came and went 3 times before noon. A man she didn't recognize arrived with a laptop and left with a hard drive and did not speak to anyone. She stayed out of it. She made tea in the kitchen and sat at the counter and listened to the edges of things and read the parenting book she'd taken from the nursery shelf, a thick volume on infant development with clean margins, and tried not to think about the sedan that had been parked on her service road at 3:47 in the morning. By mid-afternoon, Ji-hoon had identified 2 of the 3 surveillance operatives working on Darius's behalf in Seoul. By evening, a 3rd. He told her this at the kitchen counter, standing across from her with a cup of coffee he hadn't touched, delivering the information the way he delivered all operational information, concisely, without drama, with the implicit understanding that the drama was already built into the facts themselves. "What happens to them?" she said. "They're being watched. When we're ready, they'll be approached and given a choice." "What kind of choice?" "The kind where both options result in them leaving Seoul and not returning." She looked at him over the rim of her tea. "And Darius? Darius is being handled through different channels." He set the coffee down. I have an attorney in New York who specializes in cross-jurisdictional asset pressure. Darius Bennett's firm has 3 clients with exposure in markets where my organization has significant influence. By the end of the week, those clients will have received strongly worded advice to seek alternative legal representation. You're going to destroy his practice. I'm going to make his practice untenable. He can rebuild, in time, somewhere else. What he cannot do is pursue a custody filing in Seoul with no income, no clients, and legal counsel who have been quietly informed that proceeding will create complications they'd prefer to avoid. Amani was quiet for a moment. That's very clean. I told you I wasn't going to hurt him. You're going to ruin him financially and professionally and exile him from a legal career he spent 20 years building. Yes. A pause. Was that unclear when I said I wasn't going to hurt him? Despite everything, despite the exhaustion and the fear and the particular absurdity of sitting in the penthouse of her ex-husband discussing the professional demolition of her previous ex-husband, she almost laughed. She caught it before it escaped, pressed her lips together, looked away. It's enough, she said, when she trusted her voice again. Whatever you're doing, it's enough. Don't go further than necessary. I never go further than necessary. Ji-hoon, I mean it. He looked at her, and the look was the one that had always undone her. So, not the commanding one, not the controlled one, but the one underneath both of those, the one that was simply a man who was paying very close attention to a person he loved. I know you mean it, he said quietly. I heard you. She went to bed at 9 and slept the deep, annihilating sleep of someone whose body had finally decided that the circumstances required total surrender. She did not hear Ji-hoon come to bed. She did not hear the city. She did not hear anything until morning broke gray and cold through the floor-to-ceiling glass, and her daughter kicked her awake with the cheerful authority that had become the most dependable alarm clock in her life. The following 3 days moved in a rhythm she hadn't expected, operational during daylight, strangely domestic in the evenings. Ji-hoon worked. She read and walked the penthouse and had long video calls with her sister in Atlanta, who didn't know the full story and whom Amani was not yet ready to fully inform. Sung-jin briefed them each morning at 8. The surveillance operation on Darius's end was being systematically dismantled. Operatives recalled, storage accounts wiped. The Chicago attorney quietly receiving information about the methods by which Darius's evidence had been obtained that made continued representation a liability rather than an opportunity. On the 4th morning, Sung-jin arrived at 7 instead of 8, and the look on his face was different. Amani was in the kitchen. She saw him come in, saw the tablet under his arm, saw the particular set of his jaw that she had learned in the past 4 days meant the information was not clean. She set down her tea. Ji-hoon came out of the bedroom still buttoning his shirt, registered Sung-jin's expression, and said, "Talk." Sung-jin set the tablet on the table. The Macau Shell Company. We pulled the dissolution records last night. My contact at the registry took time to get them, which is why this is coming now instead of 3 days ago. He turned the screen to face them. The company was registered 18 months ago, not 4 months ago when the surveillance started. 18 months. Ji-hoon went still. The surveillance on Mrs. Brooks began 4 months ago, Sung-jin continued, in the same weatherman voice that Amani was starting to find genuinely alarming in its consistency. But the infrastructure, the shell company, the storage architecture, the network of contractors, was established 18 months ago. Someone began building the operational capacity to monitor a target 18 months ago, before the divorce was finalized, before Mrs. Brooks left Seoul. The surveillance of her specifically began 4 months ago, but the preparation began long before that. The kitchen was very quiet. Ji-hoon pulled out a chair and sat down slowly, with the precise movements of a man who needed to think, and was making room to do it. He looked at the screen. He looked at the dates. He said nothing for a very long time. Darius Bennett, he said finally. When did he first make contact with the Chicago attorney? Sung-jin's expression shifted by approximately 2 millimeters, the Sung-jin equivalent of looking deeply uncomfortable. 8 months ago, shortly after the divorce was finalized. And when was the shell company established? 18 months ago. Ji-hoon looked up. His eyes met Amani's across the kitchen, and she felt the implication of the math arrive in her chest before she had fully processed it. 18 months ago, they were still married. 18 months ago, she had not yet made the decision to leave. 18 months ago, whatever had driven her toward the door was still building, still accumulating, still not yet unbearable enough to act on. Someone had begun preparing the infrastructure to surveil her 18 months ago, while she was still Ji-hoon's wife. "This isn't Darius," she said. The words came out very quietly. Ji-hoon's jaw was set. He said nothing. "Ji-hoon, this isn't Darius. We don't know, Ge. The timeline doesn't work. Darius didn't know I was in Seoul 18 months ago. I hadn't spoken to him in 4 years. He didn't know I existed at that address, in that life, with you." She pressed her hand flat on the table. "Whoever set this up knew where I was 18 months ago, which means they knew I was with you." The silence that followed was the kind that precedes a reckoning. Sung-jin looked at Ji-hoon. Ji-hoon looked at the tablet. The morning light was coming in flat and gray off the river, and Amani watched the man across the table rebuild his understanding of the threat in real time. And it was like watching a very expensive piece of machinery recalibrate, smooth on the outside, violent on the inside. "Someone in your organization," she said. "Don't. Ji-hoon, don't say it out loud yet." His voice was very quiet, very controlled. The kind of control that was not steadiness, but the thing you build over steadiness, when steadiness alone isn't sufficient. "Let me think." She sat back. She let him think. She watched him sit with the knowledge that someone close to him, someone with access to the operational intelligence of his network, someone who had known Imani's address and her routines and her existence within Ji-hoon's life 18 months ago, had been building a surveillance architecture around his pregnant ex-wife, and had then somehow connected that architecture to Darius Bennett, which meant either Darius had been contacted by this person or the connection was itself manufactured, a layer of misdirection designed to point Ji-hoon's attention outward rather than inward. She watched him understand all of this. It took about 90 seconds. Then he looked at Sung-jin and said, "Who had access to Imani's personal details 18 months ago? Residential address, movement patterns, clinic records." Sung-jin's jaw tightened. "Within the organization?" "Yes." "At that level of detail?" A pause. "Myself. Min Seo in intelligence coordination. The residential security detail, 4 people, 2 of whom are no longer with us, and..." He stopped. "And?" Ji-hoon said. Sung-jin set the tablet down. "And Yoon Tae-kyung." The name landed in the room with a weight that was specific and particular. And Amani, who had spent 3 years on the periphery of Ji-hoon's world, close enough to absorb its geography without being invited into its architecture, recognized it. Yoon Tae-kyung, Ji-hoon's deputy, his second. The man who had been with him for 12 years, who managed the organization's financial operations, who sat at Ji-hoon's right hand at every meeting Amani had ever glimpsed through a doorway before it was closed to her. She looked at Ji-hoon. His face had gone entirely still. "Where is Tae-kyung now?" he said. "He's at the Mapo office. He has a meeting at 10. Ji-hoon stood. He straightened his shirt. He picked up his phone from the table and looked at it for a moment without doing anything with it. And in that moment, Amani saw something she had not seen in 4 days of close proximity. The thing underneath the control. The thing that was not strategy or calculation, but was simply pain, old and specific. The pain of a man who has been betrayed by someone he trusted completely. "Don't go to the Mapo office," she said. He looked at her. "Not yet. Not until you know exactly what he did and why and who else is involved. If you go there now..." "I know." His voice was very flat. "Then act like it." He held her gaze. She held his. Outside, the river moved. "Pull everything on Tae-kyung," he said to Sung-jin, without looking away from Imani. "Financial records, communication logs, travel, any external contacts that don't match his operational profile. I want it by noon." A pause. "Do it quietly." Sung-jin left without another word. Ji-hoon sat back down. He put his elbows on the table and pressed his hands against his face, and stayed that way for a long moment. The posture of a man doing something he almost never permitted himself, which was to be temporarily without a next move. Imani reached across the table. She put her hand on his forearm. She didn't say anything. He didn't move for a moment, and then his hand came up and covered hers, briefly, before the control reassembled, and he straightened and looked at the window and began visibly to think. The files on Yoon Tae-kyung arrived at 11:40. Imani was in the nursery when Sung-jin brought them. She had gone in there because it was the quietest room and because she needed somewhere to be that wasn't the operational center the living room had become. She sat in the glider with the parenting book open on her lap, not reading it, her hand moving in slow circles over her daughter, and she listened to the muffled cadence of Ji-hoon's voice through the wall. Not words, just tone. The specific frequencies of a man working through information that was costing him something significant. She had been in the penthouse 4 days. She had arrived with 2 bags and her vitamins and a photograph she hadn't looked at. She had agreed to nothing permanent, committed to nothing beyond the immediate practical reality of her daughter's safety. She had been careful, deliberate, the way she was careful about everything that involved Ji-hoon, holding the door open exactly as far as was necessary and no further, because she knew, had always known, that Ji-hoon's gravity was the kind that didn't ask your permission before it started working on you. She heard him say Tae-kyung's name, heard the silence after it, heard Sung-jin's voice, low and continuous, delivering what she imagined was a detailed and damning account. 40 minutes later, Ji-hoon came to the nursery doorway. She looked up. His face told her everything before he said a word. "Talk to me," she said. He came in and sat on the edge of the crib. She noticed him test the stability of it before he put his weight on it, the automatic caution of a man who had read the safety specifications. And he looked at the mobile turning slowly above him, and he said, 12 years. She waited. 12 years I trusted that man with everything, my finances, my operations, the location of every property I own. He looked at his hands. He was the one who set up the security detail on you when we were married. He was the one who managed the protocols. He knew everything about your life because I trusted him with everything about mine. What did he do? Ji-hoon was quiet for a moment. He's been running a secondary operation alongside the organization for 4 years, moving money through subsidiary accounts I didn't have visibility on, positioning himself to fracture off a significant portion of the network's financial infrastructure. He needed leverage over me to make it work, something that would keep me contained while he executed the separation. He looked up. You were the leverage. Imani felt the cold again. Explain. The surveillance on you was his. The shell company, the contractors, his. He built the operation intending to use it against me. Evidence of my continued monitoring of you post-divorce, the existence of the pregnancy, the circumstances of your current situation, all of it packaged as a liability, something he could threaten to expose to rival organizations, to law enforcement contacts, to anyone who might benefit from my destabilization. A pause. Darius Bennett wasn't the principal. He was a tool. Tae-kyung found him through the surveillance, found out about your history, found out that Darius had questions about your pregnancy timeline, and fed him information, made the connection for him, pointed him toward the Chicago attorney. Imani pressed her hand flat against her sternum. Her heart was doing something irregular and insistent. He used Darius, she said. He used Darius to create a visible external threat that would send me exactly where I went, focused outward, focused on a man in Chicago, while the real threat was sitting at my right hand in the Mapo office. Ji-hoon's voice was even, precisely, frighteningly even. I have been operating on misdirected intelligence for 4 days. Every move I made in response to what I thought was Darius's operation, the attorney pressure, the contractor approach, all of it, Tae-kyung saw in real time. He has a contact inside my legal team who has been reporting back. The room went cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. He knows, you know, she said. Ji-hoon looked at her. He will within the hour. My legal team contact would have flagged the direction of Sung-jin's file pull. Tae-kyung will understand what it means. Then he's already moving. Yes. What does moving look like for him? Ji-hoon stood. He was very still for a moment in the middle of the nursery, among the things he had chosen for his daughter. The crib, the glider, the animals on the mobile, and he looked like a man standing in the center of something that was collapsing, trying to identify which direction the floor would hold. He has documentation on me, Ji-hoon said. Financial records, operational records, things that were prepared as leverage. If he goes to the wrong people with the right documents before I can contain this, then what? His eyes met hers. Then everything I've been trying to protect you from, becomes the thing I can't protect you from. She heard it. She sat with it. Her daughter moved inside her, a slow roll, deliberate and oblivious, the movement of a creature who did not yet know what kind of world she was being born into. "How long do we have?" Amani said. "Hours, maybe less." "And what do you need to do?" He looked at her for a long moment. She looked back at him and did not look away. And between them, in the quiet of the nursery, the understanding moved without either of them having to say it. That the decision she had been carefully not making for 4 days had just been made for her by a man named Yoon Tae-kyung, who had spent 12 years inside Ji-hoon's trust and 4 years inside his finances, and had chosen today, of all days, to make his move. "I need you to stay in this penthouse," he said. "With Sung-jin's full team, every entrance secured. You don't open the door for anyone who isn't on the list I give Sung-jin. You don't take calls from numbers you don't recognize." He paused. "I need you to trust me for the next 12 hours, completely, without asking me to explain every decision in real time." She looked at him. The man who had signed her divorce papers to keep her safe, the man who had furnished a nursery in Sage Green and read parenting books alone in a penthouse overlooking the Han River, the man who had just discovered that his most trusted lieutenant had been building a weapon out of her life and her daughter's existence, aimed directly at everything he loved. 12 hours, she said. "Yes. And then it's done," he said, one way or another. She nodded. He turned toward the door. She said, "Ji-hoon." He stopped. "Come back," she said. Not a plea, a demand. Flat and certain, the same register she used for decisions she had already made and would not revisit. He looked at her over his shoulder. Something moved across his face. Not the controlled expression, not the commanding one, but the one underneath. The one she had only ever seen in unguarded moments. The one that was simply a man who had been in love with the same woman for 4 years and had made every possible mistake in the execution of it. "I'll come back," he said. The door closed. She sat in the glider in the nursery with her hand on her daughter and listened to the sound of the penthouse being secured around her. Locks engaging, Sung-jin's voice giving instructions, the particular silence of a building going on to a war footing. And she understood, with the complete and terrible clarity that comes when all the options have finally been removed, that she was no longer standing at the edge of a decision. She was already inside it. The first 2 hours were the worst. Sung-jin had positioned 4 men in the corridor outside the penthouse door, 2 in the lobby below, and 1 in the stairwell on each of the 3 floors beneath them. He had done this quickly and without visible stress, the way a surgeon preps a theater, not because the surgery is easy, but because the discipline of preparation is the only thing standing between a controlled outcome and catastrophe. He had given Amani a phone with a single number programmed into it and told her it would connect directly to him regardless of what was happening on his end, and then he had stationed himself at the dining table with 3 screens open and had not moved since. Imani sat in the nursery. She did not sit there because it was the most defensible room or because Sung-jin had told her to. She sat there because it was the only room in the penthouse where the operational machinery of the morning felt slightly less immediate, where the air didn't carry the particular charge of men preparing for violence. She sat in the glider with the parenting book closed on her lap, and she breathed slowly and deliberately, the way the prenatal instructor had taught her. 4 counts in, hold, 6 counts out. And she kept her hand on her daughter, and she thought about Yoon Tae-kyung, whom she had met exactly 3 times. A man of medium height with a precise haircut, and the kind of stillness that she had initially read as calm and now understood as calculation. She had not liked him. She had not been able to articulate why, and Ji-hoon had not asked her to, because Ji-hoon had not asked her opinion of his lieutenants, any more than he had invited her to attend his operational meetings. She had dismissed the dislike as the ordinary friction of a marriage, in which one spouse's professional world was permanently closed to the other. She had been right about him, and the rightness of it gave her no satisfaction at all. At 9:40, Sung-jin appeared in the nursery doorway. "Update," he said. "Yes." Mr. Kang reached the Mapo office at 8:50. Tae-kyung was not there. He left the building at 8:12. Approximately 30 minutes after my file pull would have been flagged to his contact in the legal team. Sung-jin's voice was its usual weatherman flatness. His personal phone has been off since 8:15. His vehicle was found at Yowido at 9:20, abandoned in a parking structure. He ran. He's moving. Running implies no destination. Sungjin looked at his tablet. Mr. Kang believes he's attempting to reach a contact who can facilitate a data transfer. The documentation package he prepared is leverage. If he can get it to the right hands before Mr. Kang can contain it, it becomes a weapon he can use from wherever he ends up. Yes, Amani pressed her hand flat against her sternum, feeling her own heartbeat. What does Ji-hoon need? Time. And the location of Taekyung's contact. Sungjin paused. We have a partial identification. Financial analyst, external contractor, operates out of a serviced office building in Jongno. We're working on the address. Can I help with anything? Sungjin looked at her in the specific way of a man being asked a question he had not anticipated. Mrs. Brooks. I'm serious. I spent 3 years watching this organization operate from the outside. I'm not an asset, I understand that, but I'm also not furniture. She held his gaze. Is there anything I can do? A pause that lasted approximately 4 seconds, which was a long time for Sungjin. The financial analyst's external billing records, if Taekyung used a clean payment method, there may be a pattern in the invoice structure that cross-references with subsidiary accounts I haven't had time to go through. You have a business background. Forensic accounting, yes. He looked at her for another 2 seconds. Then he said, I'll send the files to the secondary screen, and left. She moved to the dining table. The files were dense and deliberately obscured, the architecture of someone who was very good at making money move without leaving obvious footprints. But Amani had spent 2 years doing exactly this kind of work before she left the States, tracing financial flows for a litigation support firm in Chicago, sitting in front of spreadsheets that were constructed to lie, and learning the specific grammar of financial deception well enough to read through it. She had not done it in 3 years. The skill came back the way physical muscle memory comes back, not smoothly, not immediately, but with a reliable underlying structure that revealed itself under pressure. She worked. Sungjin brought her water without being asked, which she noted and appreciated. Her back was beginning its usual late-morning complaint, the deep ache that started at the sacrum and radiated into her hips, but she shifted in the chair and kept working. At 10:50, she found it. Not the address. She wasn't going to find the address in a billing record, but a payment code that appeared 3 times across 2 different subsidiary accounts, spaced at irregular intervals, attached to invoices for services that didn't match the billing entity's stated business type. The code was a routing fragment, the partial signature of a specific financial institution that operated out of a serviced office corridor in Jongno-gu. She called Sungjin over and showed him. He looked at it for approximately 6 seconds. Then he picked up his phone and said 4 words to whoever answered and listened for 12 seconds and said 3 more words and hung up. Building on Ujonggukro, he said. We have the floor. He crossed the room and began talking into his earpiece. Amani turned back to the screen and kept looking through the files, because there might be more. And because sitting still was no longer an option her nervous system was willing to entertain. Ji-hoon called at 11:17. Sungjin told me. His voice was tight. Not the controlled tight, the other kind, the kind that was control applied to something that wanted very badly to be something else. You found the routing fragment. It was in the invoice structure. Taekyung's contractor tried to disguise it as a recurring service fee, but the payment intervals were wrong. A short silence. Are you all right? I'm fine. Are you? I will be. A pause. We're moving on the Jongno location in 20 minutes. If Taekyung is there, or if his contact has the package, I know. If it goes wrong, Ji-hoon. Her voice came out flat and steady, the same register she'd used in the nursery. Come back. She heard him breathe. Yes, he said, and ended the call. She put the phone down and pressed both hands flat on the table and breathed through 4 counts and held and breathed out through 6. And then she went back to the files. On the 43rd floor of a tower overlooking the Han River, the morning moved toward noon with the particular slowness of time under maximum tension. Each minute discreet and weighted, each sound from Sungjin's screens carrying the potential to be the one that changed everything. At 11:49, Sungjin's earpiece crackled. Amani looked up. His face did the thing it did. The 2mm shift, the Sungjin equivalent of an expression. He listened for 14 seconds. Then he said, "Understood," and turned to her. Tae-kyung was at the Jongno location, he said. "Mr. Kang has him." She let out a breath she had been holding for the better part of 3 hours. And the documentation, being assessed, the transfer had not yet been completed. Sungjin looked at his tablet. "Mr. Kang will be back within the hour." She nodded. She turned back to the screen. She was shaking very slightly. Her hands, a fine tremor she could see but not entirely feel, the body running its post-adrenaline accounting, with the thoroughness it always applied to these things, regardless of whether it was convenient. She pressed her palms flat against the table until the tremor passed. Ji-hoon walked through the penthouse door at 12:31. He was still in the shirt he'd been wearing since before dawn. There was a mark on his left cheekbone that was going to be a bruise by evening. Purple-red, the size of a thumbprint. Nothing serious but visible in a way that made her chest tighten against her will. He looked at her across the apartment with an expression that she didn't have a name for and crossed to the table and stood there. "Done," he said. "Tell me." He pulled out a chair and sat down heavily, with the specific exhaustion of a man whose body had been running on operational fuel for 6 hours and had just been informed it could stand down. Tae-kyung was in the building. His contact had received the documents but hadn't initiated the transfer yet. There was an authentication process, a delay built into the security protocol. We got there inside the window. What happens to him now? Ji-hoon looked at the table. He's going to spend a significant amount of time being very uncomfortable in a location he didn't choose, while my attorneys and I decide the most efficient way to ensure he is never in a position to threaten this family or this organization again. He looked up. The legal exposure from the documents he compiled is being addressed by the New York team. The window he needed to weaponize them is closed. And Darius Bennett received a call this morning from his 3 major clients. All 3 are seeking alternative representation. A pause. He also received a communication from the Chicago attorney indicating that the evidentiary basis for any potential filing has significant problems, provenance issues that would make the materials inadmissible and potentially expose him to liability. His eyes held hers. He has no case. He has no clients. And he has been made to understand, through channels that leave no obvious trace, that pursuing this particular interest further will result in additional complications he cannot afford. Imani looked at him. "Is it over?" "The immediate threat is over. The larger operational damage from Tae-kyung's activities will take weeks to fully assess and repair." He paused. "But you and our daughter are safe. That part is done." She sat with this. Outside the window, the Han was moving in the early afternoon light, silver and wide and indifferent, the way it always was, the way rivers were regardless of what was decided in the rooms above them. "Your face," she said. He touched the bruise with 2 fingers. Tae-kyung resisted, briefly. "Does it hurt?" "Yes." She got up. She went to the kitchen and got ice wrapped in a clean cloth and came back and stood in front of him and pressed it against his cheekbone. He went very still. She could feel the tension in him from this close. The residue of the morning, the operational heat that hadn't fully dissipated, the particular held-breath quality of a man who had done what needed to be done and was now standing in the aftermath of it. She kept the ice against his face. He let her. "I found the routing fragment," she said. "I know. I was useful." Something moved at the corner of his undamaged mouth. "You were useful," he agreed. "Don't sound surprised." "I'm not surprised." He looked up at her from below the ice pack with the expression she had never successfully defended against. "I'm just—" He stopped. "What?" "I'm glad you were here," he said. "Simple. No armor on it." She held the ice against his face and said nothing, and in the quiet of the penthouse, the understanding moved between them without requiring words. The specific understanding of 2 people who have failed each other and been failed by each other and found themselves standing together anyway in the aftermath of something that could have ended very differently. She removed the ice after a minute. She sat back down. He looked at the table and then at her, and then at the nursery doorway, where the mobile was turning very slowly in the heated air. "I want to ask you something," he said. She waited. "The photograph you brought. When you moved in." He didn't look at her. "The one you packed face down." She felt heat move through her face, which was an annoyance. What about it? It's still in your bag. I know where it is. You brought it. He looked at her now. You packed it and brought it. Face down, yes, but you brought it. She held his gaze. People bring things they're not ready to look at yet. That's not a declaration. No. A pause. But it's something. She looked at the window. She looked at the river. She thought about a bathroom in a Mapo pharmacy and a positive test and the specific weight of a decision made alone in fluorescent light. She thought about sage green walls and unmarked parenting books and a man who had read safety recall notices on cribs at 2 a.m. for a daughter he hadn't been told about. Ask me what you actually want to ask me, she said. Ji-hoon was quiet for a moment. Then, stay. She looked at him. Not because of the threat. The threat is over. He held her gaze, and there was nothing commanding in his expression, nothing that was performing steadiness. Just the thing underneath, unguarded, the way it had been in the lobby of the clinic when his hand had felt his daughter kick for the first time. Stay because I've spent 8 months building a nursery for a daughter I hadn't met yet, and watching over a woman who was trying very hard to stop needing me. And I am asking you directly, with no leverage and no strategy and nothing held in reserve, to stay. The room was very quiet. Imani pressed her hand against her daughter. Her daughter, characteristically, pushed back. That's not a small ask, she said. I know. After everything, I know what I'm asking. She looked at him for a long time. She thought about all the conversations that would need to happen, the ones that were not romantic and not cinematic, but were the necessary brutality of two people who had genuinely hurt each other trying to understand whether the architecture of something new could be built on the ruins of what had failed. She thought about late nights and difficult silences and the specific ongoing work of trusting someone who had once used protection as a synonym for control. She thought about this nursery, the sage green, the unmarked books. She thought about her daughter, who would be born in approximately 7 weeks, who would open her eyes for the first time in this city, who would need a world that was more than just safe, who would need a world that was whole. Ask me again, she said, in the morning, when you've slept and I've thought and we're both... She stopped. Ask me again when it's not the middle of an aftermath. He held her gaze. All right. And Ji-hoon. She waited until he was fully looking at her. The honest conversations. The ones I told you we needed. They're not optional. They happen before anything else. Yes. All of them. Including the ones about why I left and what you did and what I did and what we both need to do differently. Yes. His voice was entirely level. All of them. She nodded. She got up, one hand on the table for balance, the weight of late pregnancy redistributing itself around her as she stood, and she walked to the nursery doorway and stood there looking at the room he had built for his daughter, the crib, the glider, the mobile, the row of books. And she stood there long enough that the silence between them became its own kind of answer, incomplete and honest and entirely sufficient for the present moment. She slept that night with the penthouse locked tight around her and Sung Jin's team in the corridor, and the city burning gold below the windows. And she did not dream about Tai Kyung or Darius, or the sedan on the service road, or any of the machinery of the past 4 days. She dreamed about Jeju, the particular light there, the way the wind came off the water with salt in it. The afternoon she and Ji-hoon had sat on a stone wall above the coast and not talked about anything important, and had been, for those specific hours, simply two people who were glad to be in the same place. She woke at 6 with her daughter pressing against her ribs, and the gray pre-dawn light coming through the glass, and the knowledge, immediate and complete, that she had already made her decision. She had made it somewhere in the hours of sleep, the way certain decisions get made, not through reasoning, but through the body's own quiet arithmetic, adding up everything it knows and arriving at an answer before the conscious mind has finished asking the question. She lay still for a while and let the decision settle into her. Then she got up, moved carefully to the bathroom, splashed water on her face, and looked at herself in the mirror for a long moment. Her face looked back, tired, complicated, older than she remembered being, and entirely her own. She went to her bag and took out the photograph. She looked at it. Jeju, 3 years ago. Ji-hoon with his jacket over one arm and his hair doing the thing it did in Sea Wind, and herself leaning into him with her face turned away from the camera, laughing at something that the photograph didn't contain. They looked like people who had not yet accumulated sufficient damage to each other. They looked like people at the beginning of something rather than partway through the wreckage of it. She set the photograph on the nightstand, face up. Ji-hoon was already awake when she came out. He was at the kitchen counter with coffee. Real coffee, not the untouched cups of previous mornings. And he looked like a man who had slept a few hours and was processing the residue of the previous day with the methodical thoroughness he applied to everything. The bruise on his cheekbone had deepened overnight to a dark purple red. He looked at her when she came in and didn't say anything, which was exactly right. She sat at the counter across from him. He poured her tea without being asked. They sat in the early quiet with the river going silver below them, and for a while neither of them spoke. "The honest conversations," she said finally. He set his cup down. "Yes. Now. Before anything else." "All right." She folded her hands on the counter. She had thought about how to begin this, in the months since the divorce, had rehearsed openings and abandoned them, had written things in a journal she kept under the bathroom sink and then read them back and found them insufficient. Now that the moment was here, she discovered that the rehearsed version was entirely useless, because the rehearsed version had assumed she would be talking to an abstraction rather than to a man sitting 3 feet away with a bruise on his face and coffee going cold in his hands. "You made decisions about my life without my knowledge or consent," she said, consistently for the entirety of our marriage. "You decided what I was safe to know. You decided what I could handle. You decided when to tell me things and what to leave out and where the line was between protecting me and managing me. And you drew that line yourself every single time without asking me where I thought it should be." She held his gaze. "And the worst part wasn't the decisions themselves. The worst part was that you were usually right about the immediate thing, the immediate threat, the immediate risk. Your instincts about danger are very good, but being right about the danger didn't make the method acceptable." Ji-hoon said nothing. He was looking at her with the total attention he brought to operational briefings, to consequential decisions, to the things he understood to be determinative. She had wanted this, his full attention, the kind that didn't hedge or deflect. And now that she had it, she understood why she had been afraid of it. There was nowhere to hide in this kind of listening. "I left," she said, "because I stopped being able to tell the difference between being loved and being controlled. Those two things, in this relationship, felt identical from the inside. And I could not raise a daughter in a house where that was the governing dynamic." She paused. "And I was wrong to leave without telling you about the pregnancy. That was not a decision I had the right to make alone. I made it because I was frightened and exhausted, and I told myself I was protecting her. And that was partly true and partly a justification for something I needed to believe was simple when it wasn't." She looked at her hands. "I'm telling you that without expecting it to cancel anything out. It's just true, and you deserve to know it." The kitchen was very quiet. Ji-hoon looked at the counter for a moment. When he looked up, his expression was the one she had no name for, the stripped one, the one without any of the professional architecture he carried everywhere. "I treated your safety as a project," he said. "That's the most accurate thing I can say about it. I treated keeping you safe the same way I treated every other operational problem, as something to be managed efficiently, with the relevant information flowing to the people who needed it to execute the plan, and not to anyone else." He stopped. "You were not anyone else. You were my wife, and I managed you." She said nothing. "The surveillance after the divorce." He looked at the window. "I told myself it was protection, that I was doing it because the world I move in doesn't respect legal documents, and you were genuinely at risk, and I was the only person positioned to mitigate that risk. All of that was true." A pause. "It was also true that I was not ready to let you be somewhere I couldn't see you. And I told myself the first thing and did not examine the second thing, because examining it would have required me to acknowledge that I was not managing a security problem. I was managing grief." He looked at her. "I missed you. I watched over you because I missed you, and it was the only contact I was willing to permit myself. That is not the same thing as protection. I understand that. Imani pressed her fingers against her mouth briefly. She had not expected him to say that. She had expected the operational justification, had prepared her response to the operational justification, and instead he had said, "I missed you," and it had landed somewhere undefended. "We're going to have to keep having these conversations," she said, when she trusted her voice. "Not just today. Ongoing." "I know. I'm not going to stop pushing back when I think you're wrong. About anything. I don't want you to. And the organization—" She stopped, breathed. "I'm not asking you to leave it. I understand what it is, and I understand that it doesn't have an exit door you can just walk through, but I need to understand the actual shape of it, not protected from it. I need to know what we're living with." Something in his expression shifted. "That's a significant ask." "I know what I'm asking." He looked at her for a long moment. She could see him working through the implications, the security considerations, the operational exposure, the specific risk calculus of bringing his wife fully inside the picture of what he actually did. She watched him work through it and arrive somewhere she hadn't been certain he would reach. "All right," he said. "All of it. All of it," he agreed. "Over time, structured appropriately, but yes." She nodded. She picked up her tea. Outside, the river was brightening as the morning came on, going from silver to a pale and complicated gold. "Ask me again," she said. "What you asked me last night." He looked at her. No performance in it, no strategy, just the look itself, direct and unguarded and carrying everything he had not been able to say in 3 years of marriage. "Stay," he said. "Build this with me. Not the way we did it before, the way we do it now, with everything on the table and both of us present for the decisions." He paused. "Marry me again, Imani." For the right reasons this time. She looked at him across the counter. She looked at the bruise on his face and the gray in his hair that hadn't been there when she met him, and the coffee cup he was holding with both hands, which was a thing she had always noticed about him, that he held cups with both hands, like someone who had been taught early to be careful with things that could spill. "Yes," she said. They were married 3 weeks later in the penthouse, at noon, with Sung Jin and 2 of Ji-hoon's attorneys as witnesses and a civil registrar who came to them rather than requiring them to come to an office. Imani wore a dress the color of winter water, not white, not ceremonial, something that was simply hers. Ji-hoon wore a dark suit and no tie, and the bruise on his cheekbone had faded to a greenish yellow that the morning light caught at a particular angle and made briefly visible. They stood at the window overlooking the Han River and said the words required by law, and then Ji-hoon said 4 additional words that were not required by law. Quietly, looking at her directly, without preamble or performance. He said, "I won't manage you." She said, "I won't disappear." Sungjin looked at the window. One of the attorneys looked at his phone. The registrar, who had performed civil ceremonies for 31 years and had heard a great many vows in a great many living rooms, looked at his documents and did not say anything. But something in his expression suggested he understood that what he had just witnessed was not the standard text. Imani's daughter was born 31 days later. Her name was Seo Ah. The name had been Imani's choice, decided alone at 2 in the morning 6 weeks before the birth, and she had told Ji-hoon the morning after she moved into the penthouse, during one of the honest conversations. And he had been quiet for a long moment and then said it was exactly right. And she had believed him because Ji-hoon was not a man who said things were exactly right unless he meant it. Seo Ah Kang arrived at 4:17 in the afternoon on a Tuesday in a private hospital in Gangnam with Ji-hoon's neonatologist and the pediatric cardiologist, and a medical team whose 11-minute response time had never been needed because the birth was, against all the narrative logic of the preceding months, entirely uncomplicated. 7 pounds, 2 ounces, a full head of dark hair, a voice deployed immediately and without reservation, that filled the room with the specific authority of a person who had decided that existing was worth announcing. Imani heard it and felt something in her chest that had no name and required none. Ji-hoon held his daughter for the first time standing at the window of the recovery room, with the late afternoon light coming in at a low angle and Seoul spread out below them in every direction. He held her the way he held his coffee cups, carefully, with both hands, like something that could spill. He looked at her for a long time without speaking, and Imani watched his face from the bed and saw the thing happen that she had only ever seen begin in the lobby of the Gangnam Clinic. The full completion of it. The armor coming down not as a controlled disclosure, but as a simple, irreversible fact. The way ice doesn't decide to melt, but melts regardless. His eyes were wet. He didn't blink against it or turn away. He just stood there, holding his daughter, and being a man who was crying, which was something she had never seen him be, and which cost him nothing now that there was nothing left to protect. "Seo-ah," he said, very quietly. The name in his voice sounded different than it did in hers, the Korean syllables landing with a particular gravity, like something being placed rather than spoken. Seo-ah opened her eyes. Imani did not cry. She watched, with her hand pressed flat against the bed beside her, breathing carefully, and she held on to the image because she understood that she was looking at the moment that everything that had happened before it, the divorce, the clinic lobby, the nursery built in secret, the sedan on the service road, the 12 years of Tae-kyung's patience and betrayal, the photograph kept face down in a bag, was retroactively revealed to have been leading toward this specific room, this specific light, this man holding this child. She did not assign meaning to it beyond what it was. It was enough that it was what it was. 6 weeks later, Ji-hoon moved his family to a property 2 hours south of Seoul, a secured estate on the edge of a valley, surrounded by the particular silence of rural land in winter, where the sky at night was full of stars that the city had spent years hiding. The security was comprehensive and invisible. The house was large enough for privacy and small enough to feel inhabited. There was a garden that had been neglected for 2 years, and that Imani looked at on the first morning and felt, for the first time in a long time, the specific desire to make something grow. She did not tell Ji-hoon about the garden desire. She told herself she was still a person who kept some things. He told her anyway, 3 days later, that he had arranged for a gardening consultation to come out the following week. She stared at him. He said he had noticed her looking at it every morning. She told him that surveilling her had been identified as a problematic behavior. He said there was a difference between surveillance and paying attention. She said the line was very thin. He said he was aware and was working on it. It was the most comfortable argument they had ever had. The honest conversations continued. Not every day. There were days when Seo-ah required every available unit of attention from both of them. Days when the organizational repairs from Tae-kyung's defection demanded Ji-hoon's focus in ways that were visible and consuming. Days when the accumulated difficulty of building something new on the ground of something broken simply required that they sit quietly in the same room and be patient with the process. But the conversations happened. Imani pushed. Ji-hoon disclosed. When he went too far into management and she named it, he stopped. When she went too far into distance and he named it, she came back. It was not graceful. It was not cinematic. It was the ordinary, unglamorous work of two people who had decided that the thing they were building was worth building, and who were doing it without the protection of pretending it was easy. Tae-kyung was dealt with in the manner Ji-hoon had described, through means that did not require a prosecutor's involvement, through a combination of financial dismantlement and legal exposure managed by the New York team over 6 weeks that left him with none of the leverage he had spent 4 years accumulating. He was alive. He was not free. The specifics were not disclosed to Imani, and she accepted this as one of the areas where the line between knowing the shape of Ji-hoon's world and being inside its operational machinery ran, and she had decided where she wanted to stand in relation to that line. Darius Bennett reconstituted a small practice in Atlanta, having left Chicago with fewer clients than he'd arrived with, and a settled understanding that certain interests were best abandoned. He did not contact Imani. She believed he would not. Darius was at the bottom of everything, a man who understood cost-benefit analysis, and the costs that had been made visible to him left no rational argument for continued engagement. The Chicago attorney quietly filed a withdrawal of preparation for the custody action that had never become a filing. The medical records that had been copied without consent were addressed through channels Sung-jin managed, with the same flat efficiency he brought to everything. By the time Seo-ah was 6 weeks old, every document that had been compiled against her parents' lives had either been destroyed or neutralized. It did not feel like triumph. It felt like the cessation of a specific kind of weight, not light exactly, but lighter. The difference between carrying something and not carrying it was not the same as being free. Imani understood this. She was a woman who had spent 8 months carrying something alone, and she knew that the relief of setting a weight down was its own complicated experience, different from joy and larger than simple relief, and requiring, like everything that mattered, time to fully become itself. In the third month at the estate, on a Sunday morning in early spring, Imani took Seo-ah into the garden. The consultant had come and gone, and the beds had been turned and a plan had been made for what would be planted when the ground was ready. The garden was still bare and brown and waiting, but it was cared for bare and brown, tended neglect rather than abandoned neglect, which was its own category of thing. She stood in it with her daughter in the carrier against her chest and looked at the turned earth and the valley beyond the property line and the sky that went, at this hour, a very specific blue that she did not have a name for. Ji-hoon came out 20 minutes later with 2 cups, coffee for himself, tea for her. He had been on calls since 7, dealing with something in the financial infrastructure that was still being rebuilt, and he looked like a man who had been working hard for a long time and was permitting himself a break of specific duration. He handed her the tea. He stood beside her and looked at the garden. Seo-ah was asleep. She slept deeply, completely, with the total commitment of a person for whom trust was not yet a concept that required examination, who simply slept and trusted that the world would be there when she woke up, because it always had been. "She's going to want to eat the dirt," Ji-hoon said. "All children eat dirt. It's developmental. There's a study." "I know, I read the same books you did." He looked at her briefly. "You read them. I've been here 3 months. There's not always a lot to do in the evenings." Something settled in his expression, quiet and private, the kind of satisfaction that doesn't announce itself but is visible anyway at the right angle. He looked back at the garden. "The south bed," he said after a while. "The consultant said it gets the most hours of direct sun. I know, I'm planting herbs there. Not flowers. Herbs first, flowers later. You start with what's useful and add beauty when the useful things are established." He was quiet for a moment. "Is that a metaphor?" She looked at him sideways. "It's a gardening philosophy." "All right." "Ji-hoon." "Yes." She shifted Seo-ah slightly against her chest. The small, warm weight of her, the sleeping breath, the absolute animal certainty of her presence. "I'm glad I'm here," she said. Simple. No decoration on it. He didn't say anything immediately. He drank his coffee. He looked at the valley and the sky. Below them the estate was quiet, the security invisible and comprehensive, the morning going about its business with the indifference of mornings everywhere. "I know," he said finally. The same simplicity, nothing performed. They stood in the garden while the spring light moved across the turned earth, and Seo-ah slept against her mother's heartbeat. And the valley below them went from brown to green in the slow, particular way that things go from brown to green. Not all at once, not dramatically, but by degrees so incremental that you couldn't identify the moment of change. Only look up one day and understand that the change had already happened, that you were already on the other side of it, that what you were standing in was no longer the same season that you started in. In the city 2 hours north, Ji-hoon's organization continued its work. The repairs from Tai Kyung's defection were completed over the following month. New financial controls were implemented, new trust structures rebuilt with the additional layer of wariness that betrayal always leaves behind. Sung-jin ran the operational detail on the estate with his usual flat competence and remained, as far as Imani could tell, entirely unbothered by the relocation, a man for whom location had never been the variable that mattered. The photograph from Jeju was on the nightstand in the master bedroom. Imani had put it there the day they moved in. Ji-hoon had not commented on it, and she had not invited comment. It was simply there, as it had been in every room she had occupied since she took it off her apartment nightstand, face down, and put it in her bag on the afternoon she moved into a penthouse with a man she had divorced and was learning, with difficulty and care and no guarantee of outcome, to trust again. It looked different in the bedroom of the estate than it had in the apartment, or on the nightstand in the penthouse. The same photograph, the same 2 people, the same Jeju light, the same moment of unguarded happiness caught by a camera before either of them had accumulated sufficient damage to each other. But it looked different because the people looking at it were different, and the room it sat in was different, and the future that extended from the moment of the photograph was no longer the one that had originally been built from it. That future was gone. What existed instead was this one, harder one, less innocent, built on ground that had been broken, and had broken both of them, and had been, with significant effort and no small amount of damage, made capable of holding something again. It was not the future either of them had planned. It was the one they had arrived at by surviving each other and themselves and everything that had been arranged against them. And it was, like all futures actually lived rather than imagined, imperfect and sufficient and entirely real. Seo Ah woke up on the first morning of April and discovered her hands. She was in the crib that Ji-hoon had moved from the penthouse nursery, the same crib reassembled with the same precise attention to the safety specifications. And she woke without crying, which she sometimes did, and lay there in the early light looking at her hands with the expression of someone who has just encountered information of significant interest. She turned them. She looked at them from both sides. She brought them together and then separated them and brought them together again. Ji-hoon was the one who heard her. He came to the nursery doorway and stood there watching her. And when Imani woke 20 minutes later and came to find him, she found him still in the doorway, still watching, with the expression she had learned to recognize. Not the commanding one, not the controlled one, not even the stripped unguarded one from the clinic lobby. A different expression. The one that had no precedent in the man she had married the first time. Because the man she had married the first time had not yet been a father, and fatherhood had done something to him that nothing else in his life had managed. It had made him, in the specific territory of this child, entirely without defense. Not vulnerable in the way that implied weakness, but open in the way that implies the permanent decision to remain so. She found her hands, he said, without looking away from the crib. They do that, Imani said. It's developmental. I know, I read the chapter. She stood beside him in the doorway, and they watched their daughter study her own hands in the April light, and Seo-ah was entirely absorbed in this discovery and entirely unaware of being watched, and she was the most ordinary, extraordinary thing either of them had ever been near. Outside, the garden was beginning. The south bed had its first green, small and definitive, pushing through the turned earth with the authority of things that intend to exist. The valley was fully green now. The sky was the blue that Imani had not had a name for, and did not have a name for now, and did not require one. The story did not end with triumph. It ended with a Tuesday morning in April, a garden coming in, a child discovering her hands, two people standing in a doorway in the particular silence of a house that had become, against considerable odds and at considerable cost, a place where things could grow. That was enough. That was, in the final accounting, exactly enough.